It's an honor to have the four of you here, and let's delve into the discussion. I have divided the discussion into three main themes, you can say. We start with where Paul left off, or what mentioned in the introduction speak, the decline of heat pump sales during the last years, what we can do about it. Then we go, again, the Draghi report, talk a bit about innovation, and then the last part, a bit on competitiveness. Then after that, I will open up for questions from the audience. So we heard there was a decline in heat pump sales, which is, of course, alarming for the heat pump industry, but also alarming for our climate and energy goals. All the targets and so assume that we will install much more heat pumps in a much faster pace. So therefore, I would like to direct the first question to Martin and Kieran. Start with you, Martin. What steps should policymakers take to increase demand for heat pumps in the short and long term?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. And actually, 2 weeks ago, I looked to the history and the forecasts of these heat pumps. I looked to figures that were made up in 2019, forecasting the sales of heat pumps up to 2025. And actually, I looked in the year 23-24 because we said it's dropping. Well, it's not so much lower than the forecasts. The point is that 22 was so high. We had a tremendous increase in 22. Yeah. And then after 22, we dropped back to the line where we were. So, and that's typically for the residential heat pump market. Yeah? Because there are other markets. If I look in the commercial market, where you had typically for a building a chiller combined with the gas boiler, there the heat pumps are tremendously increasing. The whole market is shifting from cooling only equipment to heat pumps. And the growth is continuously going on. There is no dip. If I look to, then I looked also and I saw a presentation in China, Shenzhen, about high temperature heat pumps and process applications. That's going up. So the question is, what are the drivers for this commercial and industrial applications that are working very well? And what driver do we need for the residential market to get a sustainable situation? Yeah? Not a fluctuating, because that's a disaster. In 21, 22, Commission asked to everyone to expand the capacity for heat pump production. They went even to Washington to ask the help for getting more heat pumps from the United States. They could not help so much, but okay. They asked this, and then 2 years later, the whole market is dropping. Yeah? Industry invested in this. This is not a good situation. We invested in manufacturing facility and people, and you have seen the news all over Europe where they had to dismiss people again who were in the heat pump industry. That's not a good situation. So what do we need to do for the future is to find the good driver. And EHPA made the statistics about the relation between the sales per habitant and the ratio between gas and electricity. Yeah, and there is a very clear curve showing this relation. That's fine. But there are a few countries jumping out. Belgium is one of them. Their sales is 3 to 5 times higher than this line. Why is this? Why do we have a driver in Belgium that is doing this? I think Lithuania or Estonia is also one of these. So why do we have this? There is a driver there. And what I checked, the driver typically is the building. The building is the driver. And the countries where we have a disaster is because they had a lot of incentives and they disappeared or they changed the incentives. So they are the disaster. This is the incentive-based countries. So we have to look to this. We have to look to this, and we have to look to these drivers. And I think if we find the right driver, we may have a sustainable introduction of heat pumps. Yeah. In Belgium, if you put a heat pump in your building, it's not a question of payback. Your value of your house is going up immediately. Your label of your energy label is going up. In the future, your carbon label of your house will go up. In commercial applications, this label for building is already important. In industry, process industries, companies have to look for decarbonization targets, so they have a driver. So we need to do the same for this residential market. We need to create the right driver, and expecting from the politicians to make the right driver to get a sustainable market.
All right, thank you. Finding the right drivers.
Yeah, I think consistency is really important. And in a world where politics can change quite rapidly and one government gives lots of incentives, the next government scales them back, that just creates confusion for the consumer. So you do need consistency. And I think at the moment we're at a time when the recast Energy Performance of Buildings Directive has been agreed and signed off. But there are then milestones over the next few years, and I think a really important driver is the national building renovation plans. And the first draft of those has to be in by the end of next year. And the final draft has to be a year later. And I think there's a real opportunity within those countries, within those member states that are not above the graph, like Belgium. I think it's really important to liaise with everybody in those regions and say, this is what we need in the National Building Renovation Plan to give that certainty. Because, I mean, there's only so much Europe can do, but it can, with those plans, provide the trajectory of where we need to go. The second thing that I think needs to happen is that every region requires different narratives. And the reasons why a consumer buys a heat pump, they vary. Sometimes it's a carrot, sometimes it's a stick, you know. Sometimes the incentives do work, or sometimes a government or a country that says you have to upgrade in 3 years' time will do it. But I think in some areas it's the cost of energy. In others it's air quality or human health. And I think every culture and every member state is different. It can be job creation. It can be freedom from taking fuels from dictators and oligarchs. So I think the messaging will vary from country to country. And then the final thing that occurred to me is that as we look towards a new commission and a new parliament, we see a shift to the right. We see a focus on competitiveness. So I think our bedtime reading has to be both the Draghi and the Letta report, making the single market work, enhancing competitiveness. And these were not words that were to the fore 5 years ago, but anybody in sales knows that you sniff around and you say, well, what is the flavor of the month now compared to a few years ago? And I think the framing for heat pumps will have to be along the lines of competitiveness, along the lines of a single market that is fair, green, and digital. And heat pumps can certainly tick the box of all of those things.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Austin, please.
Can I jump in? Just some feedback from the industrial market, you know, the other heat pumps. We work with companies, so they are rational animals. They react very well to the market signals. It can be driven by their consumer, the brand, the marketing. It's a very powerful driver. We don't talk about it that much, but the European Central Bank is pushing green credits, and it's impacting the cost of capital. So some companies are just looking at it because it's cheaper. You know, there are no official labels, but it's a lower cost of capital for them to invest into these type of energies than in fossil fuels. If we have a goal of 90% decarbonization by 2040, which I think the Commission proposed, for companies that can be very significant because they don't like buying assets now that they won't be allowed to use in 15 years. You know, 90% it means that everything around electric transportation, buildings, and low temperature industry below 200 degrees should be done by 2040. What's going to be left is maritime airlines, and heavy industry, the hard-to-abate sectors, steel, etc., which is not really for heat pumps. Our industry are also the lighter industry, which are not suffering that much the global competition. You know, Belgian beer, French cheese, Italian pasta, and Spanish ham, pharma industry. So they're local. They're looking at it. They're thinking about it seriously. The real question now is, why do it now? Why not wait next year, 5 years from now? So the long-term goal is clear. What we miss are the mix of carrots and sticks year after year so that they can start planning. They know if they invest in the next 5 years, they're going to make money. If they wait 7 years, it's going to be kind of equivalent to what they pay now. And if they wait 10 to 15 years, they're going to just pay more because they are the laggards. And that's the kind of trajectory that we're missing.
So getting the business model and the pitch right. All right, I think we move on to the next part. The Draghi report has been mentioned a couple of times already. But one thing I think a good point he made was that the EU risk falling behind in terms of innovation for several reasons behind American and Asian companies in several, well, in general. And therefore, I would like to ask you, Eric, is in the heat pump industry, is EU lagging behind our our counterparts in terms of innovation?
You're laughing because you know the answer, right? Yeah. So, yeah, you speak with a couple of global companies here, so we have a good overview of what's going on around the world. And I can tell you, and I can relax everyone, that we are competitive with the products that we have here. We are not lagging behind. We might be different, right? So there are different applications and there are different requirements in the globe, around the globe. So you can imagine that sometimes in Asia Pacific there's more emphasis, for instance, to air quality because they come from another level of air quality, and then air quality is driving behavior. And in Europe we want to, we focus on this carbon neutrality and carbon footprint reduction, and so we create products that match with these kind of requirements. And in the US, you see another set of dynamics that is addressed with other technology. But I think that the interesting thing here is that global companies, they connect the knowledge of the different parts, corners of the globe, and that strengthens everyone, right? At the end of the day, innovation is not something that we can define or create individually and independent of other circumstances, applications, or drivers. I think that bringing the drivers together and bringing the technical know-how together strengthens everyone. And we now see that comes to reality because the products are now created and they will continue to evolve. But end users should be relaxed and they don't need to wait for something to be available. It's available today. And it's available because we have these global resources between the different companies, and we have a couple of those companies here on the table that can strengthen the engineering power and create innovations and then apply it to the local requirements. So it is definitely another product in Europe, and it can be another product in South Europe compared to North Europe. It can be another product in a building HVAC application compared to a process heating and cooling system or a food processing system. But at the end of the day, we have the technologies today thanks to the global cooperation, I would say that.
All right, thanks. Rosten, I see you want to jump
in. I'm a bit cautious when I speak about innovation because it gives the feeling that we're not ready. It gives the feeling that, why not wait a little bit? And that kind of feeds the narrative against heat pumps overall. I don't think it's going to be for the next 3% compressor efficiency or 5% heat exchanger efficiency, which is going to be game changing. Is going to be replacing gas boilers by heat pumps, which require 3 times less energy. Even in the industrial sector, we do have high temperature heat pumps. We can generate steam, and from there it's about compressing that steam and MVR systems. I think the frontier now is the system integration. How do we get these bits and pieces, thermal storage, automation, heat pumps, steam compressors, and we integrate them into existing factories, which are never the same. So this integration is really the frontier where I think innovation needs to happen now, not necessarily the product anymore.
Are very interesting. Martin, before I allow you to jump in, I want to ask you a related question, and maybe you can combine the answer. With the new Commission and Parliament, how do you want them to support an innovative and resilient industry?
Well, on support of innovation, I think if you deeply look into the financial support that we can get for innovation, I think that's definitely enough from financial point of view. The issue we have many times as an industry with these processes of having once a year you can submit the dossier and then you can get an approval. This is looking very clearly to an academic world, not to the industry world. So we have to make more flexibility in supporting innovative projects for the industry in Europe, which is directly to the industry. That's very important. To come back on the previous, are we lacking behind Asia and US? Definitely not. Definitely not. I'm many times in contact with the US because I'm an advisor there too. They are coming to Europe to see how we are doing it with the heat pumps. I was in Shenzhen in the Chinese heat pump conference end of August. Well, they are showing new techniques that we are already having for 4 or 5 years. So don't be afraid about the fact that we are lacking behind. This is not the situation. But innovation, we have to be careful that we don't make too many measures that are too much technical prescriptive and that are actually endangering the competitiveness of the heat pumps. We have recently had several measures, and there are some in the pipeline, which are putting additional requirements and burdens for competitive heat pumps. It means that we will not be able to export our products to the other regions. And that may create a competitive burden for the manufacturers in Europe. But are we competitive in Europe to manufacture our heat pumps? I think so. With our company, we are producing already 50 years in Europe. Yeah, and we have to compete with Asian technology like air-to-air heat pumps that are very competitive. Well, we compete with them. So this is not the issue. The issue is to create a stable business in Europe for the European manufacturers to make sure that we have a stable demand, and then we can develop new techniques to make the products more competitive. But I said recently some legislations were really a barrier to be competitive for exports. We have to be careful. And I think the Commission and the European Parliament should closely look to turn back such a barriers.
All right, thanks. I think we move on to the next one. Another point, not a new point, but another point that Draghi made in this famous report already is that decarbonization of our society is an opportunity. It's of course opportunity for our clean tech industry, but it's also an opportunity because a society that doesn't rely on foreign fossil fuels is a more resilient one. And Kieran, maybe if I start with you, how do you think EU's climate work that is relatively ambitious with stringent regulations and so on that we heard, how do you think it impacts the competitiveness of manufacturers in Europe?
Well, I mean, we were talking just briefly there before we came on stage about the move away from F-gases, and there is a concern that is moving too quickly. And I note that Dombrovskis is being given the role of Commissioner for Implementation and Simplification So there may well be a wish at a commission level to just slow down on some regulation that is seen as impeding the rollout of certain technologies that are required. Certainly, the push to get rid of red tape is clear in the mission letters going to the individual commissioners. But then, and I think this is the $64 question, it all depends on the direction of travel of the new Commission and the new Parliament. Will the European Green Deal be honoured in name or in substance? And if we are serious about continuing with carbon reductions by 2030 and achieving a fairly eye-watering 90% by 2040, it will require a huge ramping up of technologies like heat pumps. But I would wait till spring of next year to see whether that intent is visible. It is good that we have a commissioner charged with climate, net zero and clean growth. So I think that's really, really helpful. And Hoekstra is given a very clear mandate for a clean industrial deal, innovation fund, the ETS2. So the signals are good, but it's too early. It's too early to see what actually will emerge from the institutions as we move through the confirmation hearings.
Yeah, I think the Draghi even dare to mention PFAS as a type of regulation which might slow down not only heat pumps and pretty much every other technology, including hydrogen, including EVs. So that's the type of regulation which can significantly slow things down and which starts to be talked about in the US. Asia obviously is not really focused on that. So yeah, when we look at global competitiveness and can we export things out from Europe, this kind of legislation can hurt us significantly.
All right, thanks. I will continue with you, Rosen, but broaden the question a bit yeah, how do you see heat pumps? How could they improve the competitiveness of EU's overall economy? If we broaden the perspective, not just looking at this industry, but what is the role you see from heat pumps?
Yeah, we see a very direct link because we are in industrial heat pumps. So we help industries decarbonize while lowering their costs. And I don't know any other technology which allowed to do that. We came to heat pumps from energy efficiency, from utility, from steam and hot water system in the industry. And when people start to talk about decarbonization, we reach the conclusion that's the only way to go to decarbonize and lower costs. And that's obviously helping with the competitiveness of the European industry. We look at it from a different angle. We look at it from waste heat, which is rejected by every plant from the cooling system, but also from the industrial process. And I think we're lacking awareness about this significant quantity of energy available in Europe, which is free, local, decarbonized. How can we leverage that to just decrease by 3 the quantity of energy going in the plants? Obviously, that has a significant impact on the upstream infrastructure. We need much less grids and much less renewable investment if we make these plants much more energy efficient. That's the difference between what we do, which is efficient electrification versus just electrification, switching to an e-boiler, or people talk quite a lot about electrified thermal storage these days. So yeah, we should promote this energy efficiency, efficient electrification message. There are also a lot of benefits on deployment. Industrial heat pumps are hidden. Nobody sees them. You don't need permits. They're run by engineers. They are much more impactful in size, but also in running time. They run like 3 times more than building heating and cooling. So the impact in terms of CO2 and energy efficiency is significant. And over time, that's going to drive, kind of level the playfield. If the whole world runs on renewable energy, and we do it first and we do it maybe more efficiently, we might actually turn this into a competitive advantage versus people running on cheap, dirty fossil fuel like the US. And China is doing it probably also to be less dependent on imported fossil fuels, additional to decarbonization.
Yeah.
Well, in this context, it's interesting. You speak about renewable energy and heat pumps. Yes, heat pumps are generating renewable energy, actually. You have to know that Europe is one of the only regions in the world where this is recognized for being a generator of renewable energy, and a few states in the US, that's all. So globally, yes, we are quite ahead. Yeah? And I think we have, if it's about competitiveness, and you mentioned PFAS to put in this, yes, we have to be very careful that as Europe we are able to still bring our technology to outside Europe. Yeah? The F-gas has made it almost difficult and impossible to do that. So that's not good. It's not good for the competitiveness of our companies. And it has a background. Actually, the booming heat pump market combined with the reducing quota in the F-gas regulation has created an unfair competition in Europe. And instead of deciding to create a fair competition for everyone, they have decided to have an unfair competition for everyone. To go in the unfair, to make it unfair for everyone. Yeah, but they forgot that we are actually killing the export of our business outside Europe.
All right, thanks. All right, then I will, before opening up to the audience, I have one maybe curveball for you, Eric. Because I experience often when you discuss with heat pump or building expert, one point that is being made is that the legislation and everything focus on one standalone heat pump or one single building rather than a whole system, a whole district, for example, in terms of buildings or heat pumps in the wider system of a building. So Eric, if you agree, how can we direct this focus from single minded to being more holistic?
Yeah, so thank you for this question because I really like the question, and it's a big topic, right? So it's been discussed already, but there is this tradition of looking in silos between. So there's a cooling process and there's a heating process. That's in buildings and it's in processes. It's in the food and beverage industry. It's in the pharmaceutical industry, in the chemical industry. It's everywhere, right? But also in the many buildings. And in my work experience that you briefly highlighted at the start. So I used to be country leader for about 15 years in the Nordics, right? So Netherlands, but also Scandinavia. And in Scandinavia, you can imagine it's a very cold area. Finland, the average temperature during the year is 3 degrees. They are used because they have to contain energy, and they are used to reuse energy wherever they can and not flush it out literally into waste. And that's a big learning. And I think that that learning is a practice that we need to advocate in our markets. We need to continue explaining to the energy users that thermal systems and thermal energy should be reused rather than relieved into air, whether it's ventilation air, whether it's waste heat coming from refrigeration systems, right? And that's a big opportunity. And what we see in the legislation, now I get to your question, right? So when we see the legislation doing the same, there's an isolated approach. So we have achieved a lot by, for instance, eco-design requirements where there are efficiency requirements for any kind of product. That's good because it not only good because it drives us to reach these kind of efficiency levels, and in fact, the efficiency levels that were set, we already reached them anyway, right? I think that we improved efficiency by 70% in several years. But then at the end of the day, there's an end of efficiency gain, and we see that legislation is more driving behavior than it drives technology, because the technology is already there, but we need the customers to be forced to use the technology. And the next step would be that we need to help the end users, the energy users, and that can be by enforcement as well, to recycle energy rather than ventilating out energy in one end and then using a fossil fuel to compensate that energy on the other end. Because at the end, if we would think of a building being an isolation bottle, and we can create it as if it is an isolation bottle, then you don't need to feed any energy because there's already electricity used, there are human beings in the building, so you should only use cooling. And the cooling should then regenerate energy, and then there's this connection. And we see, and this was, so I heard about the US, right? So we have some interesting discussions in the US where there's huge buildings and there's this let's say the outside shield of a building which is more connected to the climate. And there's the core which is almost isolated in that building. There's always heat in the core. So then you need to cool the core during the year, and you need to manage the shield during the year too. And it can be very cold out there. So it makes sense to recycle that energy again within the building rather than ventilating it out and feeding it back again. And we even use ice systems for heating so that we store the cooling in ice while we are creating energy, heating energy. And the heating energy is used at the moment it's used, and the ice is there for the moment that it's used for cooling, for the core. So we need to create a different thinking. It's not only about creating new products, and so we do a lot of innovation and we'll continue doing the innovation. It's a fantastic time. But beside of that, we need to drive behavior, and we need to create this conscience that we should not ventilate out energy out of buildings.
And I think from policy standpoint, that drives the question about system COP incentives rather than equipment COP incentives. We all know how to make very good COP on heat pumps. You just play with the temperatures. But if at the end of the day you top it up with a gas boiler or you make an inefficient system, the customer doesn't pay less or they don't decarbonize as much as they should. So a lot of subsidies are designed around the product COP. I think we should go into system COP to encourage this kind of system integration. And obviously that goes beyond the plants. We can share waste heat from high temperature steel and cement down to medium temperature going into the lighter industry, and then maybe even ending up in district heating. That's happening quite a lot with data center. We discussed that in the preparation call. And this integration is really the key.
But if we look to heat pumps, for example, in that context, and if we look to eco-design now, and the requirements that are coming up. So the initial eco-design was fine, and they put seasonal COPs as a requirement, as a minimum requirement. But we are coming now in the stage that the building or the system is the key. So instead of focusing on increasing the maps on one condition, one climate, and in Europe, we better provide the right data to do the proper simulation in that system or that building, and eventually combine different products in it, but with the right performance data to make a simulation possible. We all speak about BIM modeling and simulations. Well, let's make sure that we have the data rather than doing sub-optimizations by increasing these maps in one condition, because that will just lead to a more expensive product and will not be efficient from decarbonization. So if we look on the ton CO2 we save per euro, it's not the way to increase the maps at a certain condition. It's to provide the proper data to do simulations in buildings and systems. And we should urge the Commission to change that direction. We should ask them, please reconsider your targets instead of maps towards proper data that is certified.
All right, interesting. Kieran, do you want?
Yeah, I was curious. What alternative data would come to mind if you don't go down the road of maps of minimum energy performance standards?
One thing, for example, we have these 4 points that we now measure, or 5 points for a heat pump. We can simulate the whole map. Yeah, in order to improve that. But you have heat recovery or energy recovery systems.
Yeah.
This data or these products are not recognized even in eco-design. If you make a heat pump that can do energy recovery or so on, it's even not recognized. So why as a manufacturer should you spend money on these things basically Why should you do that? Because you have difficulty to reach your maps. Yeah, and if you want to reach your maps, you get a very expensive heat recovery machine. While in the reality, it doesn't need that for that typical system. And you may have a heat recovery system that is better for Scandinavia and another one that is better for the south of Italy. But with this eco-design requirements that is putting all equipment on the same thing and leveling it up, that's not working anymore. It's not the proper use of resources in view of decarbonization. So we are asking now also to get this heat recovery or energy recovery. Please make clear what data we will need to submit in order to do proper simulations.
Yeah. But whatever about the eco-design, within the EPBD, we do differentiate between different climates in terms of performance.
Yeah, but what if your EPBD is fine, or the EPBD is fine, but if you don't have the proper data from the product to do, for example, hourly simulations, it doesn't make sense.
At least we need to find levers to influence behavior, right? It's not about the installed technology only, so that's important. But then it needs to be used in a way that reduces the waste of energy.
Yeah, I think we will get good data though, because we will get disaggregated data that for different building types that I think will be very informative, because that is post-occupancy data that I think will inform the direction of travel and learning from that data. And I think that will influence consumer behavior in the longer term.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, there are very good examples, right? So there are many things good, right, in Europe. And again, if I go back to Scandinavia and you see Helsinki and Stockholm, they are heated by 80 to 90% by district systems. And the district systems are fed by data centers and by all other kind of waste energy. That's a very smart way, right? And now I'm Dutch, and I heard a recent discussion about having the Rotterdam harbor generating a lot of energy, and it goes into the atmosphere. And then there's a Rotterdam city that needs the energy, but it's not connected. We need, sometimes we need also policymakers to have the guts to connect the dots, right? But it's on a high level, and it's also on a building level, it's on a process level. We need to change behavior, honestly.
I think that will happen, though. I remember being in Vienna at a heat pump
Vienna
association
Energy is
a few
another
years
example.
ago.
Yeah.
But there was a wonderful description by somebody managing that system, saying, look, a district heating system, it's like a charm bracelet. And over time, you add pieces onto it and you take them away. You might start with oil and coal, you move on to gas or biomass or the heat of the River Danube, and over time you change the technologies, but you have this circulation system that can adapt.
That's what I'm saying. There are very good
changes.
examples, and we have, Vienna is an example indeed, and we are also connected to them, and many things happening there. But that's something that we need to learn from, and then we see how we need to confirm that in a way that we kind of force the energy users to at least think that way. We should really stop wasting. That is really important. And the technology is there, right? We don't need to wait for technology. It's there.
All right, thanks. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions. I see here in the front.
Thank you very much, Richard. Richard Loch, mein Name, from Termondo in Germany. We have installed 6,000 heat pumps in the last 2 years. And obviously we're always tracking and observing the market, and we know that from our surveys that there's reasons for people to not switch to the heat pump, which is very often the cost, and there's reasons for people to switch to the heat pump, which is very often the cost. And so my question is actually, when we look at the Asian players, and especially the Chinese players that are offering heat pumps for much lower cost, and if we are considering the fact that many of the parts that are manufactured for heat pumps, for even European manufacturers, are from Chinese players, my question is there any entry barriers that you're going to see or that you expect to come for Chinese players entering the European market in the next couple of months, years? Because obviously there's other players like us, clean techs, that are considering white label solutions, right? Thank you.
I'm sure that Martin wants to talk about it, but may I first react, right? Because I think that the additional cost of a heat pump is relative to the moment that you decide to invest in a heat pump. If you invest in a heat pump while you have a chiller running and you have a boiler running and they are both already invested capital and they are not at the end of their life, then you may need to think of, do I need to buy a new equipment or do I need to maybe change the chiller into something that recovers energy, and that's possible, right? But typically we see, so the lifetime of chillers is, let's say 20 years or 15 years. There's a huge installed base of chillers that need to be replaced. And at the moment of a chiller replacement, if you then upgrade it to a heat pump technology, then the additional cost is all relative. And of course, there needs to be some more infrastructure, so it's not only the product, it's also infrastructure. But then you start recycling energy, and you don't need to get rid of the boiler yet, but you just don't use it when it's not needed.
That's exactly what I meant. Sorry, I have to be clearer. So people understand that the running costs for the heat pump are much better. That's not the question. The question is the upfront costs. And there the question is, okay, if I have the chance to have a heat pump for half the price in upfront costs, why should I pick a different one, right?
Yeah, I was, in fact, I'm not clear because I was talking the upfront cost. Because the upfront cost is much less if you already have to invest in something that the building needs anyway, which is a replacement of a chiller. So we have many projects where the customer initially reached out to us, I need a new chiller, it needs to be, well, whatever the efficiency can be, right? And then we start talking about what's about your energy balance and shouldn't we also recover that energy? And then we turn that into a heat pump. And then the additional investment is relative. But there is Chinese, I must say that in the commercial buildings, I don't see much Chinese competition that is, I would say, unbeatable for us. I don't see that. But I think it's more in the residential market maybe, so that's fair. Well, Martin wants to please speak up maybe, right?
About unbeatable, I question that. Let's be clear, we are producing 2 million heat pumps per year in Europe, and we have to compete with the Chinese. Yes, that's correct, but we are doing it. And it's not by asking import measures for these people. It's by creating the added value of being a producer in Europe for Europe. This is the key. How will you produce a product in Europe for Europe? And for DG Klima, they made, and the view of decarbonization, they also made clear that for the future, actually adopting your product to the needs for the user will be the future in this direction. Carbon border adjustment mechanism will help, of course, and all these things, but let's be clear, it is not impossible. Yeah, we are quite leading in this. We are producing in Europe for Europe more than 2 million heat pumps a year. So it's possible.
And I think you made a comment when we prepared that session that the main competition are gas boilers. I think people mentioned already the electricity to gas price, shifting taxes. The good news is you don't need to shift that much because we are helped by COP. So just decreasing the spark spread by 20% might help decreasing the payback by half. And if you look at industrial heat pumps, they're more complex indeed, so they're probably locally made. There is a lot of added value in the local value chain of installation, engineering, but the lifetime of this is maybe 20 years, and the OPEX is much more significant than the CAPEX.
So I think we are making, as European society, it more difficult for ourselves than the competition from Asia is doing.
Yeah. All right, I think we could have talked about this for 2 hours more, but I'm afraid our time is up, and it's time to leave it to Davide and the third panel. But can I ask everyone to give this great panel a great applause? Right.